The wind had been rising all afternoon, coming down off the broken spine of the mountains like something wild and half-remembered. It carried dust and the faint tang of distant rain, and with it the thin metallic taste of a storm that hadn't quite made up its mind yet. Jonah Cole rode into it, because there was nowhere else to ride. His horse, a rangy sorrel with ribs like a washboard, picked its way along the rutted track that passed for a road. Brushland stretched on either side, a low ocean of sage and greasewood rolling toward the dark outline of the pines further up the slope. Far behind him lay 3 days of hard riding, a town that wanted him gone, and a trail of blood he'd done his best not to look at too closely. His side throbbed with each step the horse took. The bullet had gone clean through somewhere between the last canyon and the second day, but the wound had festered in the heat, the edges angry and hot beneath the crust of dried blood and dust. He could feel fever lapping at the edges of his thoughts like weak firelight reaching for kindling. He rode on anyway. It was almost full dark when he saw it, a flicker of lamplight where there should have been nothing but the long, empty hush of the high country settling into night. The homestead sat in a shallow bowl of land near the end of the track, a handful of stubborn buildings clinging to a patch of earth that someone once believed they could tame. A weather-beaten cabin, low and square, leaned into the wind. Behind it, a barn sagged under the weight of time and hard winters. A fence traced a weary line around a paddock where no animals grazed. In the fading light, the place looked half-abandoned, the way people look who have lost more than they have left. Jonah reined in at the edge of the clearing, breath fogging faintly in the cooling air. The lamplight came from a single window, its glow soft against the growing dark. Smoke threaded from the chimney, thin and reluctant. He listened. The wind around him, the creak of saddle leather, the low cough of his horse. From a cabin, nothing. No laughter, no voices. Just the slow, steady pulse of fire somewhere inside, doing its best to hold the night at bay. He slid from the saddle, fingers clumsy on the reins. Pain knifed through his side, and he swallowed it, standing still until the world steadied. His boots sank into the hard-packed earth of the yard. Everything smelled of dust and dry grass and the faint, comforting tang of wood smoke. He took 3 steps toward the porch. "Don't come closer." The voice cut through the evening like a snapped guitar string, high and sharp and full of something that wasn't quite fear and wasn't quite anger. Somewhere in between. Somewhere brittle. Jonah stopped. The door of the cabin was still closed, but the lamplight shifted the way it does when someone moves in front of it. A shadow crossed the window. He could feel eyes on him, weighing him, deciding. He lifted his hands slowly, palms open. "I'm not looking for trouble," he said, his voice rough with dust and long roads. "Just a roof and a corner by the fire. One night." "Turn around," the voice called. "Get back on your horse and go. Whatever's chasing you, I want no part of it. And you don't want any part of this place." The wind gusted, dragging at his coat, tugging at the bandage under his shirt. He swayed, caught himself, blinked away the blur that crept at the edges of his vision. The world tilted briefly. The horse shifted and snorted behind him, uneasy. "You got a doctor hiding in there?" he asked. "Or someone who can put a needle through skin?" Silence. Then the quiet metallic scrape of a rifle being shifted, the sound intimate and unmistakable. "I said go," she answered. There was a quiver inside she didn't quite manage to smother. "I won't warn you again." Jonah studied the cabin. The boards were rough-cut, weather gray. Someone had patched the roof a season or 2 back with whatever shingles they could find. The porch sagged slightly along the front, but the steps were freshly swept. Even in the half-light, he could see that. Whoever lived here wasn't done fighting yet. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "I don't think I can." His knees buckled on the last word. The ground came up faster than it should have. He heard his horse whinny, distant, as if from the end of a long tunnel. The lamplight doubled and blurred. He put out a hand to catch himself, and found only air. Then the world went dark. He woke to heat. Not the fever heat that licked at him on the trail, wild and unfocused, but a more familiar warmth. The thick, steady kind that comes from a well-tended fire and 4 log walls keeping the wind on the wrong side of them. He lay on something narrow and hard and flat. It smelled of cedar and lye soap, and a sharper sense of herbs hung somewhere close by. When he tried to move, his side protested in a rush of white-hot pain sharp enough to steal his breath. Easy. The word floated to him from somewhere near the foot of the bed, low and steady. A woman's voice, the same one that had warned him away, though now the edges were smoothed by fatigue. He blinked, forcing his eyes to focus. The cabin was small and square, built for utility, not show. A rough-hewn table anchored the center of the room, set with a single lamp whose yellow light left the corners in shadow. Shelves along one wall held jars of dried plants, bundles of something green and brittle hanging from nails hammered into the ceiling beams. The fire in the stone hearth burned low but hot, a pot suspended over it by a blackened hook. She stood near his feet, sleeves rolled to her elbows, a cloth in one hand. She wasn't young, not in the way town girls were young. The years had carved their share of lines at the corners of her eyes and mouth. But there was something fierce and unfinished in the set of her shoulders. Her hair was pulled back loosely, more out of habit than vanity, dark strands escaping to soften her face. Her eyes were the color of storm clouds just before they broke, and he had the distinct, sudden feeling that they had seen more of the world's cruelty than its kindness. He realized he was staring. She realized it about the same time. "You're stubborn," she said, turning back to the basin on the table. "Most men fall down and stay down when their bodies tell them to. Most men aren't still breathing once they're shot in the side," he replied, voice coming out quieter than he intended. "I've always been poor at doing what I'm supposed to." She didn't smile, exactly, but something eased in her expression. "You were half dead when you collapsed in my yard," she said. "Another hour in the saddle, and you would have been fully there." Jonah shifted his head enough to see his side. His shirt was gone, replaced with clean, rough bandages wrapped tight around his ribs. The cloth showed a faint seep of red, but nothing like the soaked mess it had been. "You're the someone good with a needle, then," he said. "I get by," she answered. He watched her wring out the cloth, fingers quick and sure. She moved like someone used to doing many things with very little, precise, economical, no wasted motion. "You didn't have to drag me inside," he said after a moment. "You told me to ride on." "I did." She dabbed the cloth at his forehead, cool against the heat of his skin. "Then you went and fainted on my porch like a sack of flour. You could have left me there." She hesitated, just for a heartbeat, but he felt it. "Could have," she agreed. "Didn't." He studied her face, the tightness around her mouth, the way she kept half of herself turned away from him, as if by instinct. There was fear there, but not the kind people had when strange men fell into their lives. This was deeper, older. A fear of what came after kindness, not before it. "What's your name?" he asked. "Lena," she said. "Lena," he repeated, letting the syllables settle. "Jonah Cole." Her eyes flicked back to his, as if that name meant something she wasn't sure of yet. After a moment, she simply nodded. "You don't know where you are, do you, Jonah Cole?" "Somewhere north of Dry Creek," he guessed. "Mountains at my left all afternoon, sun in my eyes for most of it. That puts us near the old Spirit Hollow line." She studied him again, reassessing. "About 2 days ride past Spirit Hollow," she said slowly. "This is Chalk Ridge. What's left of it?" He let his gaze wander around the cabin again. One bed, one table, one chair. No children's things, no second pair of boots by the door. On the mantel above the fire, a small wooden horse stood beside a framed photograph turned face down. The absence of so many things said almost as much as the few that remained. "You live out here alone?" he asked. Her shoulders tightened. She poured something from a small bottle into a cup and held it out to him. "Drink this," she said. "You need rest. Talking can wait." He took the cup. The liquid was bitter as sin on a cold morning, searing a trail down his throat. Whatever it was, it wrapped sleep around him like an old blanket almost immediately. As the darkness closed in, he heard her voice somewhere between him and the fire. "You should have ridden on," Lena murmured. "You really should have." The storm came in the night, like she knew it would. Jonah drifted in and out of dreams that tasted of blood and gunpowder and the way firelight looked on faces he couldn't quite remember. Each time he surfaced, he heard the storm a little clearer, the wind clawing at the walls, rain lashing against the roof like thrown gravel. Once, he woke to the sound of the front door bar being dropped into place with a solid thud. He saw Lena's silhouette against the lamplight as she checked the window latch, then moved to stare out into the dark. One hand braced on the frame, body held very, very still. "Whoever you're waiting on," he mumbled, words thick with sleep, "I don't think they're riding in this." She startled slightly, then turned. "Go back to sleep," she said. "Storm's nothing. It's when it passes you need to worry." "When it passes?" She didn't answer, only moved back to the fire, stirring the coals until they flared up, throwing her face into sharp relief. There was a scar there, he realized. Not big, nothing grotesque, but a white line that ran from her left temple down across the cheekbone, ending near her jaw. Old and well-healed, but it had cut through something softer once. You could see it in the way the skin didn't quite remember how to smile anymore. The rain grew louder. Sleep pulled at him again. He let it. By morning, the storm had blown itself out, leaving the land scrubbed raw and new. The world outside the cabin was washed in a pale, cold light, the kind that flattened distances and made everything feel further away than it was. Jonah woke to the smell of coffee and something frying in a pan. His side hurt less. The fever had backed off to a sullen simmer. He pushed himself up on one elbow, jaw clenched against the ache. Lena glanced over from the stove, but didn't rush to help him. She watched as he got himself upright, judged what he could do, what he couldn't. "You move like someone's taken a piece out of you," she observed. "They did," he answered. "Bullet-sized piece." She snorted softly and turned back to the pan. "Figured as much on the hole in your side." He eased his feet to the floor. The boards were cool under his bare skin. His boots stood near the bed, cleaned of most of the caked dust and mud. "You went through my things," he said mildly. "I needed cloth for bandages," she replied. "And I wasn't about to let you bleed out on my only quilt." He glanced at the chair where his coat lay folded. He could see the outline of his gun belt on the table, his revolver empty of cartridges. She followed his gaze. "You won't be needing that until you can stand without falling over," she said. "And maybe not even then." He lifted his hands in surrender. "Fair." She brought him a cup of coffee and a plate with a biscuit and a fried egg. The food smelled like heaven. He realized abruptly he hadn't eaten anything warm in 2 days. "Thank you," he said. "Don't thank me yet," Lena answered. "You've brought trouble to my doorstep. I can feel it. Just haven't seen its face yet." "You always talk like that?" he asked. "Like the world's waiting to fall apart on you." "Only since it did," she said quietly. They ate mostly in silence. The storm had left a bright, hard-edged stillness in its wake. Jonah could hear the drip of water from the eaves, the soft, distant rush of a swollen creek. "You said this place is Chalk Ridge," he said finally. "I heard about it. Thought it was further east." "It used to be," she replied, "until the town moved on and the map makers stopped caring." "What happened?" Lena's jaw worked. For a moment, he thought she wouldn't answer. "Started like all the others," she said at last. Little cluster of buildings around a promise. This one was silver, up in the hills. Men came with picks and shovels and dreams. Some brought families. Some brought guns. Some brought both. She wiped her hands on a cloth, eyes unfocused, caught in some middle distance between the cabin and the past. Then the vein ran dry, she went on, or deeper than they were willing to dig. Some left. Some stayed, tried to scratch a life out of the dirt. A man named Cade found a new way to make money out here. Took what he wanted from those who couldn't stop him. Called it dues for protection. Jonah's hand tightened on his cup. The name sparked a memory like hot ash in old coals. "Why Cade?" he asked. Lena's gaze snapped to his. "You know him." He took a breath that didn't quite reach the bottom of his lungs. "Used to," he said. Before he decided robbing stages and burning out folks who said no was a better living than running cattle. Her silence sharpened. "You rode with him," she said, not a question. "For a while," Jonah admitted. "Long enough to know better. Short enough to still sleep at night most days." Lena studied him. He let her. made himself meet her eyes. Whatever she was measuring, he figured he owed her the right to weigh all of it. He was here, she said at last. Cade, him and his men, called themselves the Ridge Riders like it was a badge of honor. My husband thought he could reason with them. Said being decent counted for something even with men like that. Her hands had clenched around the dishcloth without her seeming to notice. The knuckles stood out sharp and white. They came one night when he was in town, she said. To remind us whose land this really was, they said. I told him to run later. Told him we could start again, somewhere they don't treat women and land like things to take. He said men like that don't follow you if you stand up once. That they'd respect us. Her mouth twisted bitter. Men like that only respect the fire they start and the smoke that follows, Jonas said softly. She nodded once. They tied him to that post outside, she said, flicking her chin toward the yard beyond the window. Beat him in front of the neighbors. No one came out. No one stopped them. The sheriff said he was sorry after it was done, that those men were too dangerous. Her thumb ran unconsciously along the scar on her cheek. After Cade left, the town emptied faster. Everyone who could go went. The rest scattered along the ridge where he might not notice them. I stayed. Someone had to. Someone had to remember this place wasn't born of fear. Jonas swallowed. The coffee had gone cold in his hands. You said you don't want trouble, he murmured. But you're sitting right in the path of it. Her eyes burned. I tried to send it away last night, she snapped. Told it to ride on. It fell on my porch instead. He set the cup down carefully. I can leave when I'm steady enough to sit a horse, he said. Won't be your problem long. Lena looked at him for a moment that felt longer than it was. You fell into my yard, she said finally. I stitched you together. Whether I like it or not, that makes you my problem until you can walk all the way off my land on your own. Is that how it works out here? He asked. That's how it works for me, she replied. He opened his mouth to answer, but a sound from outside cut him off. Hoofbeats. More than one horse. Coming steady up the track. Lena went still. The air in the cabin changed, tightened. She moved to the window, eased the curtain back a sliver, looked out. Who is it? Jonah asked. She let the curtain fall. When she turned, the color had drained from her face, leaving the scar along her cheek a pale, accusing line. Ridge Riders, she said. They're back. After all this time, Wyatt Cade doesn't forget unpaid debts, she replied. And he doesn't like loose ends. She crossed the room in 3 quick steps, unhooked her rifle from the wall, and checked its chamber with practiced hands. Don't come closer, she had said the night before. Now he understood. It hadn't been fear of him. It had been fear for him. How many? He asked, swinging his legs carefully off the bed. 4, she answered. Maybe 5 behind them. Hard to see through the trees. Jonah stood up. The room tilted, then steadied. The pain in his side flared, then settled into a throbbing roar. You're not standing, Lena snapped. You're lying back down. You can barely breathe without wincing. He shook his head, teeth clenched. Cade sees a man in this cabin. He'll burn it to the ground with us inside, Jonas said. You know that. I know that. You want to face him alone. She drew herself up, shoulders square, hands sure on the rifle. I've been alone a long time, she said. I know how to do it. He took a step toward her. It cost him more than it should have. Lena, he said quietly, you dragged a half-dead stranger inside instead of letting the storm take him. That tells me something about the kind of person you are. I've spent years trying to forget the man I was, riding with Wyatt. Maybe it's time I remembered what kind of man I wanted to be instead. Her jaw tightened. Don't come closer, she whispered. But he did. He stopped just short of her, close enough to see the fear behind the anger, close enough to feel the tremor in the air between them. You warned me once, he said. I heard you. Came anyway. I'm not leaving you to them. For a long heartbeat, they stood there in the small cabin, close enough to touch, the sound of approaching horses pounding through the floorboards like distant thunder. Finally, Lena thrust the rifle into his hands. You're a fool, Jonah Cole, she muttered. But I suppose fools are the only ones who stand up to men like Cade. She moved to the table, slid open a drawer, and took out a small pouch. She pressed it into his palm. Ammunition, she said. You'll need it more than I do. I'll take the shotgun. If they get close enough for that, things have gone badly wrong. He checked the rifle, loaded with efficient practiced motions despite the pain. It had been a long time since he'd handled a weapon with intent instead of habit. His hands remembered far more than he liked. The hoofbeat slowed, then stopped outside. Men's voices floated in, rough and confident, the sound of boots hitting the ground. Jonah moved to the window, keeping to the side, and glanced out. Wyatt Cade hadn't changed much. Time had thickened him across the shoulders, silvered the edges of his hair, but the set of his mouth was the same thin, hard line Jonah remembered. He sat his horse like the land owed him a living. For men flanked him, ridge riders by their posture alone. Long coats, rifles slung loose, eyes never still. Lena Hart. Cade's voice rolled across the yard, smooth as worn leather. Beauty, like you shouldn't lock yourself away out here. Come say hello. Lena moved to the doorway, shotgun cradled in her arm. Jonah stayed in the shadow between the hearth and the bed, rifle angled low. She stepped onto the porch, chin raised. You've got a strange sense of beauty, Cade, she said evenly. And a shorter memory than I thought, if you're back on this land. Some debts take time to collect, he replied. 3 years ago, I left you a warning. Figure by now you'd have taken it and gone. This is my home, she said. You don't get to decide where I lay my head. Cade smiled. It never touched his eyes. You mistake me, he said. I don't care where you lay your head, Lena. Only care that the land under it ends up in the right hands. Yours, she said flatly. Mine, he agreed. Or someone who understands the value I can bring. Railroads pushing west. Folks with money need men who know how to clear obstacles. Obstacles like families, she said. Like husbands who say no. Cade's gaze sharpened. One of his men shifted in the saddle, uneasy. Now why bring old grievances into a bright new day? Cade asked. Your Nate made his choices. You made them for him with your fists, she answered. He was buried with the boot prints still on him. A flicker of annoyance crossed Cade's face and was gone. He talked too much, he said. You don't. That's what I always appreciated about you, Lena. You understand when to stay quiet. That's why I gave you time to reconsider instead of burning you out like others. Thought maybe you'd learn gratitude. Her grip tightened on the shotgun. This land isn't for sale, she said. Not to you. Not to whoever you're running your errands for. Cade sighed, as if disappointed in a stubborn child. Then we go back to the old way, he said. Fear's a good teacher. Fire's better. Last chance, Lena. Sign it over and walk away. Don't, and you'll wish that storm last night had taken you. Jonah felt the air shift. The memory of other front yards, other men giving other ultimatums, rose up like smoke in his throat. He stepped forward. Seems to me you talk too much now, Wyatt, he said, voice cutting through the morning like cold water. 5 heads snapped toward the doorway. Cade went very still. Cole, he said after a moment, disbelief and something like grudging admiration tangled together. I'll be damned. Thought that bullet of Sanders would have finished you. You never were easy to kill. Jonah stepped out onto the porch beside Lena. The light hit him full in the face. He forced himself not to squint. Turns out I'm as stubborn as you are mean, he answered. Cade's laughter came out low and rough. You picked strange hills to die on, Jonah, he said. First it was that caravan. Now it's this widow's patch of scrubland. You've gotten sentimental in your old age. Jonah's fingers curled around the rifle stock. Maybe, he said, or maybe I just got tired of watching you break things you didn't build. Cade's eyes narrowed. You riding with her now? He asked, nodding at Lena. That it? Found yourself a cause. I'm done riding with anyone who leaves graves behind just to prove they're alive, Jonah replied. The men shifted, uncomfortable. Loyalty bought with fear rarely holds firm under the weight of questions, and Jonah could see some of the cracks appearing. You all heard him, Cade called, sweeping his gaze over his riders. This man turned his back on you years ago, on the life we made. Now he stands with a woman who cost us good men, because her husband couldn't keep his mouth shut. You want to follow that? Or you want to follow someone who gets things done? The men sat their horses and said nothing. The birds in the trees around the clearing had gone quiet, as if even they were waiting to see which way the balance would tip. Lena's voice broke the stillness, soft but steady. You think fear is the same as loyalty, Wyatt, she said. It isn't. Fear just waits for something stronger to come along. Kate's head snapped toward her, eyes blazing. "And what's stronger out here than me?" he demanded. Jonah slid the rifle barrel a fraction higher. "Memory," he said. "Men are starting to remember what you've done. Folks in Spirit Hollow, in Dry Creek. The ones who lost sons and fathers when you cleared obstacles. You think the railroad buys enough judges and sheriffs to hide every grave you've planted?" Kate sneered. "You always did love speeches," he said. "Never learned they don't stop bullets." He flicked his hand. It was an old signal, one Jonah's muscles remembered before his mind did. Two of Cade's men tugged their reins, moving to flank the cabin. Another unslung his rifle. Lena inhaled sharply. Inside, Jonah murmured to her without taking his eyes off Cade. "Now." "No," she hissed. "This is my porch, and it'll still be yours after this, if you move," he said. "You trust me enough to sew me back together. Trust me enough to do this my way." Her jaw worked. For an instant, he thought she would refuse. Then, with a muttered curse, she backed through the doorway, keeping the shotgun level until the last moment. Jonah took one step forward, filling the space she'd left. "Killing us won't solve your problems, Wyatt," he called. "It'll just give them names." Cade's eyes hardened. "I don't need you dead," he said. "I just need you gone." He snapped his fingers. The man with the rifle jerked it up, aiming for Jonah's chest. The world narrowed. Jonah moved sideways as the shot cracked the air apart, heat lancing across his ribs where the bullet grazed the bandage. He dropped to one knee, felt the porch boards splinter under him. His own rifle bucked against his shoulder. One of the flanking men toppled backwards off his horse with a choked cry. Chaos broke like a dam. Horses screamed. Hoof churned the yard into mud and broken earth. Gunfire exploded in sharp, savage bursts. Somewhere, Lena shouted his name, the sound swallowed by the roar. Jonah rolled, teeth clenched against the blaze in his side, and fired again. Another rider's hat flew off. The man jerked, grabbed the saddle horn, stayed up. The next bullet chipped the cabin wall inches from Jonah's ear. "Enough!" The shout came from the tree line, a new voice cutting across the gunfire like a whip crack. Everyone froze. A dozen men stepped out from the cover of the pines, rifles at their shoulders. They wore no badge, but their faces carried something heavier, the tight set of people who've lost enough to stop being afraid. Jonah recognized some of them from the names Lena had spoken. Farmers, ranch hands, a storekeeper from Spirit Hollow. One man wore a preacher's collar askew, the set of his jaw anything but meek. "We heard you were riding again, Cade," the preacher said. "Figured we'd come see if the stories were still true." Cade's horse danced under him, uneasy at the press of so many bodies, so much tension. "You boys sure you want to do this?" Cade asked. "I've got men, guns, friends in places your names never reach. You pull those triggers, there's no going back." "We're already past going back," the preacher replied. "You taught us that when you put Rachel's farm to the torch." A murmur of grim agreement rolled through the men. Cade's gaze snapped back to Lena. "You did this," he snarled. "You brought them here." "I didn't have to," she said, stepping out onto the porch again, shotgun steady. "You did. Every grave you left behind walked here this morning on someone's legs." "Put down your guns," Jonas said quietly to the men in the trees. "Let him ride. Let the law take him." Heads turned his way, surprised. "He doesn't deserve that," someone muttered. "Maybe not," Jonah answered. "But we do. We deserve not to carry the weight of his death on top of everything else." Cade laughed, short and sharp. "Listen to him," he said. "God's own conscience, this one. After everything he did with us." Jonah's shoulders tensed. "I won't pretend my hands are clean," he said. "Rode with you long enough to stain them. But I walked away before the fire you love so much ate me alive. Today I'm standing where I should have stood years ago. That's all a man can do with the past. Stand somewhere different in the present." Silence spread, brittle as frost. Lena's gaze flicked to Jonah. There was something like understanding there now, and something quieter. A question that wasn't really a question at all. She stepped down off the porch, boots sinking into the wet earth, until she stood halfway between Cade and the line of men in the trees. "You're leaving," she said to Cade. "Today. You and whoever still thinks you're worth riding with. You don't come back to Chalk Ridge." You don't come near the people you've hurt. You do, and you won't find us so patient next time. Kate stared at her, at Jonah, at the men in the trees, at the shotgun in her hands and the memory in their eyes. For the first time since Jonah had known him, Wyatt Cade looked old. You think you've won something here, he said finally. All you've done is delay the world. Men like me don't disappear. We just change trail. Maybe, Jonah said, but you'll be doing it away from here. Slowly, Cade lowered his gun. You always were a disappointment, Cole, he said. Could have built an empire with me. Jonah met his gaze steadily. I'd rather build one fence straight than a whole kingdom crooked, he replied. Cade made a small, dismissive gesture. He turned his horse with a vicious jerk of the reins. One by one, the remaining riders followed, some glancing back once, some not at all. The sound of their departure rolled away down the track like retreating thunder. For a long moment, no one moved. Then the men in the trees lowered their rifles as if some great invisible weight had just slipped off their shoulders. The preacher exhaled, a ragged sound. Didn't think he'd ride out, he admitted. He did, Jonah said, and you all stayed standing. That's what matters. One of the farmers stepped forward, hat twisting in his hands. We came to help you, he said to Lena. You could have sent for us sooner. You shouldn't have had to stand alone all this time. Her mouth trembled just once. I didn't think anyone would come, she said. Not after the sheriff said there wasn't anything to be done. We believed him then, the preacher said. We don't anymore. They stayed long enough to share coffee and news, to ask if she needed repairs, wood seed. Lena answered, eyes still wary but softer now. Jonah sat on the porch steps, side throbbing, listening to the easy murmur of men who had chosen something better than fear. Eventually they drifted back into the trees, back to their scattered farms and small towns, leaving the cabin and the clearing quiet again. Lena closed the door gently behind the last of them. In the hush that followed, Jonah felt the strain of the morning settle into his bones all at once. His knees buckled. He caught himself on the table, breath hissing between his teeth. Lena was at his side immediately. You're bleeding again, she said, voice tight. Sit. He obeyed. The chair creaked under his weight. The room spun in slow, lazy circles. She peeled back the bandage. Blood had seeped fresh where the graze had reopened. You shouldn't have stepped out there, she muttered, soaking a cloth in clean water. You could barely stand. If I hadn't, he replied, Cade would have seen it. Used it. Men like him smell weakness. You know that. She pressed the cloth to his side, not gently. Doesn't mean you had to go courting dying. He watched her work, hands steady despite the tremor in her voice. You were scared, he said quietly. Not of him. Not exactly. She hesitated, then nodded once. I was scared you'd die on that porch, she said. For land that isn't yours. For a woman you don't know. Jonah studied her face. The scar, the eyes, the set of her mouth when she was trying not to let her hands shake. You told me not to come closer, he said. The first night, you were trying to keep me clear of his shadow. I was trying not to drag anyone else into my ghost, she answered. They've taken enough from people already. He reached up, slow and careful, and caught her wrist. She froze, though she could have pulled away easily. Lena, he said, you're not a ghost. You're the only thing between this place and the kind of men I used to ride with. You think that's nothing? Her throat worked. Her gaze dropped to where his hand held her wrist, his thumb resting against the pulse point there. I think I'm tired, she whispered. He let her go. Then rest, he said. You've earned it 10 times over. She finished binding his side in silence. When she stepped back, her eyes had returned to that storm-gray calm. You can stay, she said abruptly, until you heal, until you decide where you're riding next. He looked past her, through the small window, at the land stretching away, a patchwork of scrub and dry grass and stubborn, scattered green. The sky above it had softened, the harsh brightness of the morning giving way to a gentler light. I thought maybe, he said slowly, surprising himself at the words as he spoke them, I'd ride less and stay more. Somewhere. Here, she asked. He met her gaze. Unless you're still telling me to turn around, he said. She studied him for a long moment, all the weight of her years and losses and stubborn, quiet hope in that one look. Don't come closer, she said softly. He blinked. Her mouth curved then, a small, unexpected thing that reached all the way to her eyes. "Not unless you mean to stay," she added. He smiled back, the expression rusty on his own face. "I've been running from who I was for so long. My horse is about worn through," he said. "Seems as good a place as any to stop and build something instead of burying it." Lena turned away, busying herself at the coffee pot, but he saw the way her shoulders eased, just a little. "Then we'll see if you can swing a hammer one-handed while you heal," she said. "Barn roof leaks. Fence needs fixing. Chickens we don't have yet need a coop." "I can manage that," he said. "Never helped chickens before. Could be a fine change from chasing men like Cade." "Most things are," she replied. Spring came late to Chalk Ridge that year, reluctant and cautious, as if the land itself didn't quite trust that the storms had passed. Snow lingered in the shadows of the pines long after the valley floor had turned to mud, and the creek ran high and fast, swollen with old ice and new rain. Jonah healed in slow degrees, the wound in his side fading from a constant roar to a dull ache to the faint itch of scar tissue forming. He learned the particular creaks and sighs of Lena's cabin, the way the door stuck on humid mornings, the trick to coaxing the stove to draw without filling the room with smoke. Days found him mending fence posts, his movements deliberate, careful not to pull at the healing flesh. Lena worked beside him more often than not, sleeves rolled, hands as skilled with a hammer as they were with a needle. Together, they righted the sagging barn, patched the roof with salvaged tin, coaxed a garden out of soil that had known more neglect than care in recent years. Some evenings they sat on the porch and watched the sky burn itself out behind the hills. Sometimes they spoke, small things, about weather and crops and the names of birds that nested under the eaves. Sometimes they didn't, letting the quiet stretch comfortable between them. Jonah told her, in pieces, about the years with Cade, about the day he'd wanted a bank burned and the people inside left as examples, and the way Jonah's stomach had turned when he smelled flesh under the smoke. The night he'd ridden away while the others slept, saddle light, heart heavier than it had ever been. Lena told him, in fewer words, about the months after Nate's death, about the way the town's eyes slid away from hers, the way the sheriff's apologies didn't reach past his doorstep, about the night she almost packed everything she owned onto a wagon and left. "What stopped you?" he asked. She considered. "I woke up before dawn," she said. "Went outside to the yard. There was frost on everything. The boards of the house, the fence posts, the fields. It made them beautiful, in a way they hadn't been in a long time." She glanced at him, the ghost of that early morning in her gaze. "I couldn't leave that," she said. "Couldn't let men like Kay be the last ones to touch this land. So I stayed." He didn't say it aloud, but he thought he understood. Staying was its own kind of courage out here. So was trusting someone enough to let them stand beside you. Some days, he caught her watching him when she thought he wasn't looking. Not with suspicion, as before, but with a cautious wondering, like someone testing the ice of a thawing river. One afternoon, as he was leaning against the fence he'd just finished mending, the ache in his side little more than a memory, he heard hooves on the track again. His hand went automatically to his hip and paused. His gun was inside, on a peg by the door, where he'd begun leaving it. A single rider approached this time. Not Cade, not one of his men. Young, lean, wearing a battered hat and a deputy star that looked newly polished. "Name's Eli Turner," the rider said when he dismounted, tying his horse to the post. "Out of Spirit Hollow. Sheriff's man now." Lena came to stand by Jonah's shoulder, wiping earth from her hands. "You're late," she said. Eli ducked his head, flushing. "Couldn't get clear sooner," he said. "Word got around what happened here. Folks want to talk about it." "About?" Standing up. He looked up at them, eyes earnest. "Cade's gone," he said, "or at least gone from these parts. Men who rode with him scattered. Some came through town quiet-like. Some went east. Some just vanished into the canyons. But he won't be back this way. Not with so many people watching." Something in Jonah's chest loosened. A knot he hadn't known was there. "And the law?" Lena asked. "You gonna pretend it never happened, like the last sheriff?" Eli squared his shoulders. "No, ma'am," he said. "We're writing it down. All of it. Names, places, graves. People need to know it wasn't just the wind that took their lives away. He hesitated, then reached into his coat. "Got this for you," he said to Lena, holding out a folded paper. "From a judge in Redcliffe. Title proper. Signing this land over to you by name. Not some companies. Not Cade's. Yours." She took it carefully, fingertips lingering on the ink. "And if someone else comes along?" she asked. "Someone with smoother words and more money than Cade?" Eli smiled, shy but firm. "Then we'll remember this time," he said, "and we won't let you stand alone again." He left before sunset, riding back down the track, his horse's hooves kicking up small puffs of dust that glowed in the slanting light. Lena stood by the fence, the paper in her hand, watching until he disappeared around the bend. "You all right?" Jonah asked. She nodded, eyes distant. "It's a strange thing," she said. "Having something on paper say what I already knew in my bones." "That this land is yours?" he asked. She glanced at him, the corner of her mouth tilting. "That this land is ours," she corrected quietly. The words settled between them with surprising ease. That night, the sky cleared so completely the stars seemed almost close enough to touch. The air held a softness it hadn't had in months, a promise of warmer days to come. Jonah sat on the porch steps, whittling a scrap of pine into something resembling a horse. Shavings gathered at his boots like pale curls. Inside, he could hear Lena moving about, the clink of dishes, the murmur of a song hummed under her breath. He turned the unfinished carving over in his hands. It wasn't much to look at yet, but the shape was there, waiting to be coaxed out fully. Like this place, like whatever life he was slowly, carefully building here. The door creaked open behind him. Lena stepped out, arms folded against the lingering chill. "You're going to carve that thing down to a toothpick if you keep worrying at it," she said. "Just trying to get it right," he replied. "Feels like if I can make one good thing with my hands, maybe it'll start to balance the scales." She came to sit beside him, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. "Maybe it's not about scales," she said. "Maybe it's about direction. Which way you're walking now, not where you've been." He studied her profile, the line of her jaw, the way the starlight caught in her hair. "And which way am I walking in your mind?" he asked. She looked at him then, really looked, and whatever answer she'd been holding back slipped free in her eyes before she spoke it aloud. "Towards something," she said, "instead of away." They sat there a while longer, listening to the creek in the distance, the soft rustle of night creatures in the grass. The silence between them was different now. Not the brittle quiet of strangers sharing a roof, but the easy stillness of two people who had chosen, in their own stubborn ways, to step closer instead of turning aside. Eventually, she reached out and took the half-carved horse from his hand. "You'll have time to finish it," she said. "Tomorrow. Next week. Next year." "You sound awfully sure of that," he said. She turned the small piece of wood over, tracing the emerging shape with her thumb. "I told you not to come closer," she said. "You did anyway. Seems only fair I give you something worth the trouble." He watched her, the lamplight from inside catching the scar on her cheek and turning it, for a moment, into something almost luminous. "Reckon you already have," he said. She didn't answer, but she smiled, and this time it wasn't cautious at all. In the distance, a coyote called, its voice rising and falling over the hills like a question with no urgency for an answer. The night breathed around them, vast and wild and full of the kind of possibility that only comes when the worst has already tried and failed to break you. Jonah leaned back, palms flat on the worn boards of the porch, and felt the solid, steady pulse of the earth beneath him. The land was still here. She was still here. He was still here. For a man who had spent so much of his life riding away from things that felt like no small miracle. "Don't come closer," she had cried. He had stepped forward anyway, and somewhere along the way, without him quite noticing, the distance between who he'd been and who he was becoming had started to close, too. The night deepened. The stars wheeled slowly overhead. In the cabin behind them, the fire burned low and steady, a small, persistent light holding back the dark. For the first time in longer than he could remember, Jonah Cole let himself believe that when morning came, he would still be exactly where he was supposed to be,